Genesis chapter 21. We're going to be looking at verse 8, and we're going to be looking at a very, I think, misunderstood portion of Scripture. I think it's misunderstood because there's been so much misinformation given about this passage, and I hope on at least one of the things that I'm going to bring out, it doesn't destroy your faith in me. It's a joke, but it struck me as a little bit funny, and I saw the funny side of this, and I probably sometimes I have a twisted sense of humor. Okay, let's put it that way. So anyway, we've been studying the life of Abraham, and Abraham started out life as Abram or Abram, and I probably butchered that one too. So some of these are Hebrew pronunciations like Sarah, and so that's just what I'm hearing as I'm studying and listening to different things and tapes and people who actually speak the language or are from that culture, the way they talk, and I'm probably ruining the names anyway. So Abram and Sarah started out as a call from God, and that was chapter 12, and a call came to Abram and Sarah, and he said, come, step away from your home, what you know, and I will give you a great amount of land, and I will build a great nation from you, and all the people of the world will be blessed. And so at 75 years old, Abraham stepped out with his wife Sarah, and they went out, and God directed and led them, and they settled in Bethel. Famine hit, they went down into Egypt, and there, of course, they told that lie about Sarah being his sister, and got the Pharaoh in kind of trouble, and so they got ushered out of Egypt with a load of goods, including Hagar. Now, Hagar is an Egyptian slave girl who was given to Sarah as her handmaid. Okay, and so as they came back out of Egypt, went back up towards Bethel, with all this stuff that they'd been given as they went, his nephew Lot, Abraham's nephew Lot, their workers, their shepherds, their herdsmen began to argue and fight over land, over where to let their flocks and graze, their sheep graze, and their cattle. And so Abraham, of course, says, you go one way, I'll go the other. He says, you choose. And so Lot took the lower valley land. The land was like Eden, as far as how plush and green and bountiful it was. And Abraham, of course, took Bethel and that area there. Now, over the period of time, several things happened. One of the things that happened is they got impatient. Abraham and Sarah got impatient over, they knew that they were going to have offspring, they knew that they were going to have children, but were unable to do so. Sarah began to realize that she was not going to be able to give her husband a child, and so she took matters into her own hands, and she said, look, we have Hagar here, and why don't you, I'm going to give her to you, and you can have a child with her. And so she did, and that happened. And of course, that created kind of a rift, naturally, in the family. And as Hagar began to gain confidence, she began to hold Sarah in contempt. In other words, she was trying to push Sarah out and saying, you're second rate, you are broken, you are no good to your husband, and she began to hold her in contempt and was pushed out. And of course, in chapter 16, they come back, Hagar and Ishmael, which is God hears. God heard Hagar's cries and gave her a son named Ishmael, means God hears. And so that phrase comes up again and again in the story of Hagar and Ishmael. Well, now, as that went along and years went by, now you're talking where Abraham is 100 years old, Sarah is probably 75, and we get to this chapter 21. In chapter 21, we saw the birth of Isaac. Now, Isaac is the child of promise. He is the child that came from almost that miracle baby. You know, that one where you don't, there's no way this can happen, but it happened. And physically, they were beyond childbearing age and all but given up. But God says, no, this is going to happen, and this is going, you and Sarah are going to have a child, and you're going to name him Laughter, and that's kind of a play on that because she laughed. Abraham laughed. Abraham laughed in joy. Sarah laughed and that can't happen. You know, I'm past that. There's no way that's going to happen. And when the Lord says, "Oh, why did you laugh?" She goes, "I didn't. I didn't. That wasn't me." He goes, "Oh yeah, it was." And of course, Sarah said, "Well, maybe." But the name was going to be Laughter. That's what Isaac means. Isaac means he laughs. And so when the child was born, everybody was laughing. Sarah was laughing. She couldn't believe it. There's something that she says here that's probably a song. There's a cadence to it. There's a rhyme to it. And probably a song about not being able to give her husband children. But in her old age, it was, and it made her laugh, and it made her joy. And this joy is what she's singing about. And so we saw that down through verse 7 of chapter 21. I want to read this passage, because this passage from here down to about 21, from 8 to 21, has been told over and over and over and over again in Sunday school. And probably misunderstood, because the pictures in our mind need to be adjusted. Okay, so I'm going to read through it, and then I'm going to tell the story of what I think, how it happened. Okay, and just what I understand to be true. In verse 8, it says, "The child grew." Now this is Isaac. Laughter. Laughter grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. Of course, that's a big party, because he's no longer nursing, and he's going to eat solid food, semi-solid. The Gerber, probably peas or something, but something like that. But verse 9 says, "But Sarah saw the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abraham, was mocking. And she said to Abraham, 'Get rid of the slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac.' The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, 'Do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it's through Isaac that your offspring,'" which means Ishmael, "will be reckoned." Will be reckoned. That means reconciled. Redeemed. Okay? Redemption was going to come through Isaac, but Ishmael was going to be a recipient. Okay? That goes back to a previous encounter. In verse 13 it says, "I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Verse 14, "Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. And he set them on her shoulders, and then sent her off with the boy. She went on the way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water and the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes, and then she went off and sat nearby, about a bow shot away. for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And she sat there nearby and began to sob. Pretty sad scene. Okay, verse 17. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar and from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin of water and gave the boy drink. God was with the boy, and as he grew up, he lived in the desert and became an archer, where he was living in the desert of Paran. Paran is just like north, is in the area of Egypt. It was fairly close to Egypt. And it says his mother got away for him from Egypt. Okay, so we read this, and we have these pictures and images, and I'm going to shatter those for just a little bit. Okay? When Isaac was born, okay, Ishmael was probably about, 10, 12 years old, in that area. Okay, so when we get down to verse 7 and move to verse 8, now that boy is weaned. That Isaac is weaned, right? So normally this would happen in this culture between 2 and 5. It basically depends on when the child's teeth come in. That usually ends the weaning process. Now you're going to eat regular food. And so that had to happen, so he was at least 14, Ishmael. At least. And possibly up to 17. Basically a middle school / high school student. Okay, so he was not a small child, he was not a toddler, he was not a baby in any sense of the word. He was a young man. Okay, not yet come into marriage and work and being out on his own and all that, but he was he was a bigger person. He was what we would say is probably capable of being on his own, but still a young guy. Probably not fully developed physically, emotionally. Probably had attitudes and probably still was annoying as teenagers can be. Okay? And so as they had this party for Isaac, because Isaac was now going to eat solid food, okay, they had this party, and here Ishmael comes in and is messing around with this 2 to 5 year old. And he begins to pick on him. And he begins to mock him, it says. He's mocking him. In other words, he's mocking that this is the child of promise. He's mocking God. He's mocking God's plan of redemption. He's mocking that process. He's mocking him. Okay, this is a reflection of Hagar's attitude. Hagar held Sarah in contempt when he was born. This continued. These attitudes continued. Okay, they were held down, they were held in check until this point. Okay, at this point they begin to resurface. And now Sarah has had it. She cannot take it anymore. Okay, she's put up with this for years. Her child is now growing, and she has had enough. Okay? When people try to say polygamy works, it doesn't work. Okay? There are always issues here, and this is one of the issues. And so they had this time of contention, and so she goes to Abraham, and she says, you get that slave woman's son out of here. He will never participate in our son's inheritance. What's she talking about? She's talking about a couple of things. They have enjoyed, as slaves, as her servants, as someone who's given to them. Now, I'm not condoning slavery in any way, but that's the culture. That's what they were. And she's saying, as a slave woman, she's acting, and her son is acting like they're heirs. They're not. They've forgotten their place. And they're not going to participate in this. Okay, so they've enjoyed the benefits of the blessing of God to Abraham and to Sarah. Okay? And I'll come back through this in a little bit. It says, and then she goes to Abraham and she goes, look, get rid of him. Turn him out. Send him. Free him. In other words, free him from that situation. They can go and they can go into whatever they want. Abraham became very distressed. Why was he distressed? The boy. Because of the boy. Okay? And don't be confused, because I still call Jonathan my boy. He's in his 40s. Okay? He will be my boy even if when we get to that age, when we get to that part where he's got to take care of me. Still my boy. Okay? My daughters are my daughters. This is the same idea, is he's still under his tutelage. He's still under his care. He sees him as his son, his boy, and he has spent most of all his childhood with him and a lot of his coming to adult years with him. Imagine the times when they went out and talked and sat and did things together and shared sunrises and sunsets and all of those things that you share with your children. He had all that, and he was so distressed, and he knew what it meant to turn them out. He knew what it meant to turn them loose. Because when he turned them loose, it says here that when they went to take them and turn them loose, he gave them what? Some water and some bread. Okay? They weren't going to get a lot. They weren't going to get the bounty, the blessing, but they were going to be turned loose. So a little hard. He was distressed about that. And so he probably began to complain to God about this. He probably began to say, God, this, we can't do this. We got to do something here. And God said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't be so distressed. Yes, it's sad. Yes, this is going to be hard. But there comes a point in time when we have to look at our children and say, okay, you're your own person now. You have got to stand before God on your own. Okay, you go out from under, you separate from that umbrella of Abraham's faith, and you've got to have your own faith. So there comes that time, there comes that separation. He says, no, because I have a plan for him. God says, they're going to be a great nation. From him is going to come a great nation. And he's going to be blessed because of you. You say, well, how does that work? Well, we've enjoyed it here in this country for years. We were founded on Christian principles with Christian values. We've enjoyed the blessing of that. The further you get away from Christian values and principles and Christian faith, the less you're going to have, the less purpose you're going to have, the less enjoyment of those blessings. We're seeing some of that now, just as we pass in time and attitudes change. Faith changes, people change. Okay, and it says, but he says, I'm going to step in and do this thing for your son. And he's going to become a great country. They're going to be a great nation. We're going to take care of it. And so Abraham knew that God's hand was on Ishmael. And that was going to happen. That was not something that, they weren't going to send them out on their own and they were going to be attacked and killed or starved and die of thirst or any of that stuff. God was going to enter into his life somehow. And so early the next day, he gets up, he takes Hagar, he says, here's your bottle of water, here's a few biscuits. Probably very emotional, and he sent him on the way. Here he has his young man and mom. The scene then changes. The scene then goes out where they actually go out into the desert. What happens between that bush where Ishmael is getting ready to die and that departure? I think what happens, and I'm trying to play this out, and I probably should step away over here. This is just how I would do it. Okay, if I were the 17-year-old, and my mom and I were just kicked out and given a bottle of water and a few biscuits, and I knew it was my fault, because I had been picking on that, and I picked on the process, and I picked on the promise. If I had done that, I probably would have gone out and said, Mom, this is yours. That's yours. I'm not going to eat food, and I'm not going to take anything to drink. So he, of course, was overcome with thirst, because this is the desert. Okay, this is a harsh land. And so they went out, and they were turned out. That sent away, that turning them out, carries with it the idea that they were without purpose. Nowhere to go, nowhere to be, nothing to do. Okay, so they go out, he begins to become overcome with thirst, and so he begins to stumble, then gets him to a bush, lays him in the shade. She can't handle it. She can't handle being there, and so she backs away. It says about a bow shot. Now remember, these aren't compound bows. These don't have overdraws, lightweight materials, highly engineered bows. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some may not know what I'm talking about. These are the old longbow product. Okay, and the arrows are not the short and lightweight arrows. They are the wood, straight as you can possibly find, with the tips on them and stuff, and wrapped in feathers and all that stuff, and probably about 100 yards. Now, if you watch the Bills game, I really don't want to bring it up, probably about as far as Josh's big throw, that 75-yard bomb he threw towards the end. That's probably about what it was, probably with more art than what he put on that wall. But probably about that far. And she just backed away. And she began to cry. And God said, what are you crying about? She says, I've got this. This is going to be okay. You need to trust me. And that's the point of this passage, is you need to trust me. No, you're not part of the promise. You're not going to be the reckoning. You're not going to be the redemption. That's got to come through Isaac. But you're going to benefit from that. You're going to be reckoned righteous because of what that ends up with Jesus through that line. But you're going to have benefit from that. This isn't the end for you. And so she goes and she lifts up Isaac, and then God opens their eyes. They see the water, they get refreshment. They talk about that. He does. What I really like is there are several things here that God does. Verse 17, God heard. Verse 19, God opened their eyes. Verse 20, God was with the boy. And so all the way through this, God is very much involved, and he is working with them. And even though they had mocked God, they mocked his plan, they mocked his people, they mocked the ones his choice, he was still working with them. His grace. Tremendous amount of grace here. Okay, and so then as they go out, he grew up, became an archer, went down to Egypt and got married. Okay? And so, kind of went back home. Okay, now let's look at this a little slower. Okay, take our time, go back to verse 8. It says, and the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast, threw a great big party. But Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian. That means something. She's not called that anywhere else. It's Sarah's handmaid. Now she's referred to as Hagar the Egyptian. That talks about attitude. That talks about where she believed that she belonged. That's where she wanted to be. She wasn't happy there. But Hagar the Egyptian. And so she began to, and as Ishmael began his mocking. Now, here's the picture. The spiritual picture is that when you mock God, what do you have left? What's left? Because if you mock God, and if you fast forward this, it's played out on the cross. Here you have Jesus on the cross paying for our sin. On one side you have a thief that is mocking him, that is joining in, and that is saying, oh yeah, what he do wrong? He deserves what he deserves what he's getting. And then on the other hand, you have a thief that says, no, hey, we belong here, he doesn't. Doesn't even death bother you? And Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise, the other guy not so much. That's what's wrong with the world. When the world mocks God, they have nothing to offer. They have a bottle of water and a few biscuits. They certainly don't have anything to answer death. They have no real purpose. Yeah, they have some. They have a little bit. Answer this question. What's the meaning of life from the world's perspective? What's your purpose here in this world? You don't have it. You have, okay, I'm going to, I'll help people do this and that. That's about it. Not this much. You trust Christ. You follow God. You believe in Him. What's your purpose? What's the meaning of life? God tells us what that is. God says it's not, this is just the beginning. We have an eternal life beyond this that is amazing. We have a message that is incredible. And we're going to mock God and accept the world's, what they have to offer? Yeah, they have a little bit. But it doesn't go very far. Sooner or later, we're going to be under the bush. What then? We mock God. So he says, they were turned away. One of the other areas I found was so interesting to me is down in verse, let's start in verse 11. It says, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to what Sarah tells you. What? I thought, women were supposed to listen to their husbands, okay? This kind of is, wait a minute. This destroys my idea of, head of the household and leadership and all this. What do you mean, listen to your wife? Pastor, that's on the verge of heresy right there. And I have to admit, there are times when I probably should listen to Ginger a little more than I do. Because there are certain things that she's in tune with, and I'm not. There's things that I don't listen to Ginger about because if she gives you directions, don't listen. Jonathan and I kid Ginger about a few things, and one of those things is that she could walk out, you take her into a store and say, okay, which direction do we have to go now to go back to find the car? She will choose the wrong way every time. Every time. questions are not her forte. But there are things that are, she understands. She understands people way better than I do. Okay, she's in tune with people a lot more than I am. Okay, but that funny sound in the car, not so much. Abraham, listen to your wife. Listen to what she says. Listen to what she's telling you. Abraham, this is old Testament. Okay, and God is telling Abraham, the father of faith, to listen to his wife. I just thought this was a little point. But it says, listen to her. Because he explains it. It is through Isaac, or through that line, through his descendants, through that your offspring, Ishmael, will be reckoned. Okay, remember back when after they come back to the where God had met with them and he said, look, I want you to circumcise all the people in your household. This is back about chapter 16 and 17 in that area. And Abraham said, if only Ishmael. If only Ishmael was the one. And God said he's not. He's not going to be the choice of redemption. But he is going to receive blessing. And he is going to become a great nation. Okay, so he says he's not, but he's not turning my back on me. It's just the path of redemption is going to go through Isaac. It's going to go through Jacob. It's going to go through David, through the line of Judah. It's going to end up with Jesus. That's the line. It was predetermined. And even though Abraham, you may have goofed up and taken matters into your own hands and done this thing, and the result is Ishmael, I'm going to turn my back on it, but it's not going to change my plan. The plan of grace, the plan of redemption, the plan of being reconciled with God is going to happen. And Ishmael will be a part of that blessing, just like we are. We're not part of that plan of redemption, but we are part of the reconciliation. When we trust Christ, we are reconciled to God. We become the children of God. We become the sons of God. Why? Because of what Jesus did for us. He reconciled us. And when we put our trust in Him, that comes to us. Just like it did to Ishmael. Now, I talked a little bit about when he sent her off. In verse 14 it says, the next morning Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar. Why did he do that? I understand, and I'm not even sure what it's called, that when you would when you would free someone, if you decide, okay, this is a good thing, I'm going to turn you free, your debt has been paid or whatever, and they would turn a slave free, they would give them a meal. And that's basically what they have here. He gave them water and some bread. Not a lot of water and not a lot of bread. It wasn't going to take them very far, but he gave it to them as kind of a lunch is on me. He bought them, here's a gift card to McDonald's. You can get a sandwich and a drink. That's about what it was. And pointed them towards Egypt and said, good luck. Have fun. I'm sure this was emotional. I'm sure this was extremely hard. And I'm sure that's why Ishmael collapsed. Because I'm sure as he went away, he was sobbing. It doesn't say that. But it should be over here. But wouldn't you be? You knew that because you were picking on the turned loose without purpose, without direction, you were just, you and your mom, out together. How hard that must have been for Ishmael. How hard. But he had to get to a point. The only thing he had left to trust, the only thing he had left to depend on was God. And turn to God. And that's what he did. That's what he does here. That's a hard thing for parents to watch. It's a hard thing for parents to see their children go through. And they go through hard times and they struggle and they have this thing. And it's so we focus on God. Because God is the eternal answer. This isn't about a short-term thing. God sees our future and our children's futures and their eternity. I love that God heard the boy cry. God hears. He hears this call out. In verse 17 it says, God heard the boy. That's what his name means. God hears. He heard Sarah. He heard Hagar, and he heard Ishmael. He heard them. And it's more than just he heard them. Oh, what's that noise? He heard them with his heart. He heard them with a plan in mind. That should speak volumes to us. When we go through hard times, turn to God. Call out to him. Because he hears and he cares and he can act. And he does act and he acts on our behalf. It says, and God opened their eyes. God opens their eyes. Boy, if we could have our eyes open just for a little while. We say, how God really does have this. You know, and we need to turn the news off for a little bit and say, okay, Lord, I'm in distress here. I need you to hear me, and I need my eyes open. I need to know that you've got this. I know that you know our tomorrow, our next weeks, our next month, years. I know that you understand this. But I need it. I need to see it. I need you. And I might not know what's going to happen next week, next month, next year. But I know who does. And it's the God who loves me. God who cares. It's the God who hears. And it's the God who is there. Verse 20. God was with the boy. You mean God was with the boy when he went down towards Egypt? Yeah. He was there. He was there when he learned to shoot the bow. You've got to kind of like Ishmael for that, by the way. That's a cool skill. But God was with him. God was with him as the descendants grew. They became a great nation. God is with us. God is with us, no matter what we face. He's with us. He never will leave us. He won't forsake us. He's there for us. Let's pray. Lord, you are so good to us. So much better than what we deserve. So Lord, I ask that as we think about your word today, that you would impress upon us that our role is to call out to you. That our role is to come to you and let you and hear from us, so that we might hear from you. That you might open our eyes, so that we might know your presence, so that we might even be reconciled to you.